I am your host, Adolfo Di Lorenzo. This is your episode 4 of the 10-part webinar series, PortaiNerd, how to. And today we are going to learn how to use Portainer Business as a collaboration platform for developers. Right? It's going to be quite interesting. Um, Although Portainer is primarily seen and it primarily is a container management platform for both Kubernetes and Docker. There are other ways that you can also make use of Portainer's advanced RBAC and connectivity features to develop a collaboration platform. And mainly for developers, yes, you could say that, but there might be other uses. In this case, this is the example we're going to show. I'm Adolfo Di Lorenzo, tech evangelist at Portainer. This is my LinkedIn address and email, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or send me emails if you would like to have any more detailed discussions or demos, specific demos for yourself or for your company. Soon, Michael Cooper will be joining us. He's our product engineer at Portainer. This is his LinkedIn and email information if you'd like to link with him also. Connect with him via LinkedIn social media or send him an email on any specific questions or doubts that you might have. And in this episode, you will learn how to use Portainer as a collaboration platform for developers, right? And by the end of the episode, you should have a good understanding or a basic understanding of the edge agent concepts, cross collaboration, and how to access remote Portainer instances. Okay, right then. So, thank you very much for joining. Um, I prepared a slightly different architecture for us to work on this demonstration today on this PortaiNerd series. And so this is the architecture I prepared. I have a Docker, Portainer Docker standalone machine with several endpoints connected to this machine, primarily using edge agents. I'm sorry, I did make a little mistake in this diagram. The mini 0 and mini 1, which are Kubernetes nodes, are actually connected directly. They're not using edge agents. But the two devices here to my left, which is edge 0 and edge 1, and John, Ubuntu Linux, and Diana Linux Mint, those are, yes, connected to a Portainer standalone instance using an edge agent. And now, I'll soon explain the differences and what's the concept between an edge agent. This is an interactive webinar, so if at any time you would like to ask questions, please feel free and we'll answer them accordingly. So without further ado, let's go to our desktop. The demonstration here has the purpose of showing an architecture based on what we consider the best use or a good use of the edge connectivity technology that we have with Portainer. So let me see if I can bring up the architecture here. Right, so this is the architecture. Let me zoom it in so you can see. This is the architecture I prepared. So this is a Docker standalone machine. That is this instance here, okay, that we see in the screen. And oops, this happens. Okay, and here we have a set of entities or endpoints, if you may, connected to this instance. Two edge agents, these are ARM devices. Two Kubernetes nodes, Mini 1 and Mini 0, Mini 1. John, Ubuntu Linux, this is a laptop, or actually it's a virtual machine, but I'm emulating this as a laptop. And Diana Linux Mint, also a laptop. So these are end users, right? Initially, people have the idea that the edge agent can only be used for edge devices, which is not really the case. We have other ways of using our edge agent and this is what we're going to show today. Okay, right. So this is the Docker machine. As I said, it's got a Kubernetes cluster connected to it. I have two edge entities. These are ARM devices, as I have explained, and the edge agent, right? So in this case, you see it's actually even taking some time to connect to this agent, because the concept behind the edge agent in Portainer is of a way to connect to endpoints via unreliable or slow or lagging networks. Because these IoT devices are, you know, they're not machines that are developed to perform, um, let's say, intensive computational data or processes or functions in your environment, right? They're usually used to collect information on the field, right? And depending on how you have distributed your IoT devices, you might have to deploy. Let's say if you work in a farm, right, and you have IoT land that measure temperature or humidity of the soil. They might be in remote places of the activity to get to this IoT device might not necessarily be, very reliable. Might not necessarily need to be actually a 4G super highway speed connected network to that device. And also because again, these devices don't have so much power, right? So what's probably going to happen is that you're going to have a sort of a connectivity of a little device, and I'm actually going to show you a device I use here. That is, I use it for testing purposes. Let's see. So something similar to this. Okay, this is like a tiny IoT device that you connect to the field. It uses a 2G connectivity antenna, right? And let me go back to stop sharing so you can see. Okay, so I was trying to show, this is like a tiny 2G device. It's actually a Raspberry Pi that has a 2G modem to it. And you can use this to measure whatever in the field, right? So this is an example of a low latency device that you would want to connect to something in a given scenario, right? I was giving the example of a farm, right? But it can be an industrial environment. It can be, there are several applicabilities to IoT today. So the edge agent was developed to be able to connect to these devices that can be, spread around in several types of networks and not necessarily very stable, right? So the way it connects to AI to a device is slightly different from the traditional Portainer agent. The Portainer agent, which is the one I'm using here for the Kubernetes cluster, if I click on it, you see that the response time is much faster than an edge device. It relies on a stable network, right? And this is actually this Kubernetes cluster is running on my lab, so it's on my local network. It's I don't have any net connectivity issues, and it connects to this cluster very quickly, very easily. Now, the edge devices could be spread around anywhere, right? It can even be a satellite connection. So, but this is not the only applicability of the edge agent, as I had mentioned. We can use the edge agent for something similar to this architecture that I have just mentioned here, right? And why that? Because you don't necessarily want to be or need to be always connected to your Portainer instance if you're a user, right? Unless you want to work on your Portainer or your development of a Docker image or whatever you're developing using Portainer. Otherwise, if you use and you could be like working again remotely at a cafe, or at home. And for that, because you're not connected directly to the same network or to the same local network that the Portainer instance is hosting your development tools, it's best to use a Portainer agent, right? So here we have the example of John. John is an endpoint, actually. I haven't created a user called John. The name of the machine is John, and it's connected to this Portainer instance, again, using a Portainer agent, right? Okay, questions, lovely. Small rabbit to chase. What silk card? Okay, I will share the link in the Q&A. It's a very nice little device that I bought on Amazon. It cost me like, I don't know, $30, $32 or something like that. I'll get the link and I'll share it here for you guys to see. It's actually not only you can use it also on regular devices. It's not only to be used with a Raspberry Pi Zero. You can use it with a Raspberry Pi 4, Jetson Nano, even with your computer. It's a regular modem. In this case, it's got a specific build that you can connect nicely to a Raspberry Pi Zero, right? Okay, so I'll show you later, Garth, and thank you for the question. So back to our demonstration. So this is John's machine. John is actually a machine that is running Ubuntu. And here I have, let's see if I can, oh, this is not John. Let's see. Okay, this is John, right? So John Wick, and I believe he does, is running Linux, to say the least, Ubuntu, right? But again, I don't have a user created for John yet. The only thing I did is I connected John's machine, right? So let's create that user. So I'm going to create a user here, John. User. And let me just do something quickly here, guys. Let me just remove the edge. Okay, okay. So now I'm going to add the John user to the John machine. Okay. So John user to the John, and because it's his machine, I'll leave him as an endpoint administrator of his own machine, right? In this case, John is a developer and he's working in developing images using Docker to be deployed later into either Docker or Kubernetes, right? As an example. Okay, now you see that I also have another machine here. And this machine is a machine running Linux Mint. It's Diana Price's machine, maybe, and I do believe that she also runs Linux Mint. I like the Linux Mint interface. I think it's really nice. And again, I haven't even connected her machine yet to the Portainer instance, or have I created her user. So let's start by connecting Diana's machine to the Portainer instance using the Portainer agent. So how would we do that? And this is common to both Portainer Business Edition and Portainer Community Edition. It works the same. So first thing I'm going to do is going to add the Diana endpoint, which would be her machine, as an edge agent. And again, why edge agent? Let me explain this once more. Because both John and Diana, they work remotely, right? They're not connected to the same network where the Portainer instance is running. So the best thing to do is connect them by the edge agent. That reduces errors and the need to have constant connectivity of the Portainer instance with these machines. Okay, so I'm creating the Diana endpoint, which is how to connect to a machine. I'm gonna put her in a group called users, with a user tag. This is for, just so I have, because I'm adding a lot of endpoints to my Portainer instance, a good way to organize these endpoints in my Portainer instance. Okay, so this is also good practice. Not only add an endpoint, but make sure you have a proper group and a proper tag to this endpoint. These tags and these groups can be also used via the Portainer API for automation or for integration with other tools, right? So Diana is also running a Docker standalone instance of her in her machine because she's also a developer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to connect to a Diana's machine. I'm already connected to John's machine. I'm going to connect to her machine via um, SSH. I think that her IP is 58, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is. Good. So I'm going to do this as root because I can ensure it will run. So here I have the Docker standalone command to install the Portainer agent on Diana's machine. Please, let me just make sure I haven't, because I was running some tests earlier. Okay, it's already there now. So let me stop this. I'm going to stop this Portainer agent. I'm going to remove this Portainer agent. I'm going to reinstall it so you can see how it's done. So again, let's go back, recap. I'm going to add an endpoint of Diana, which I already did as an edge agent. Let me do this again. I have good flow of how it's done. Right. Add endpoint. It's not running on my network. It's running remotely. So I'm going to add it as an edge agent. The name of the machine, Diana, so I know whose it is. I'm going to add this machine to a group called users with a user tag. And because she's running Docker standalone on her machine, I'm going to select Docker standalone as an edge agent, copy the command just by clicking here. We'll go back to the terminal and run this as root. Okay, let's see if it's running already. Yes, it is. It's a tiny image, so it loads and it starts running very quickly. Okay, so here what I need to do is add Diana's machine's IP address. There's no ports, just like that. Update the endpoint. And let's see if there's a heartbeat. Okay, I see Diana's machine. So when you're using an edge agent, different from the traditional Portainer agent, you see this is a Portainer agent. It reads up because it's running on the network. It's running on my local network. So I have constant connectivity connection to these machines using the traditional Portainer agent. With an edge agent, I have a heartbeat, right? So it's not connected to these machines as it would with a traditional agent. So it's polling the machine to see if there's a heartbeat. If I turn off, and I will show you if I turn off a machine, what happens. The heartbeat will go red, meaning it's not talking to that machine anymore. That doesn't mean that the machine there's something wrong with it. It might just be a connectivity issue, right? So again, this is for cases where you need to have remote connectivity to these endpoints, right? Now, you may say, oh, but what if I'm running on a VPN, on a stable VPN that's also running on a nice network? Well, that's a different case, okay? So if you have like two physical networks that are connected to a VPN, and they have low latency and a good connection, then you can use a Portainer agent. But in this case, I'm talking about mobility, right? I'm talking about networks that are not as stable as a traditional local network, right? Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing as I did with John. I'm going to add the user Diana. Okay. Oops. I'm going to get this user. And now I'm going to add to the Diana endpoint, the Diana user as an administrator. It's her machine. So now she can access her own machine as an administrator. Now let's go back to the architecture. Okay. So you see that what I installed in these machines was the agent. I didn't install the entire Portainer software, only the agent. Because what I really need is to have a centralized Portainer instance to manage these endpoints, and I'll explain to you why. Um, these these two users are working on a project, right? So, and this project is centralized in this Portainer instance. Here I have several endpoints connected to this Portainer instance. As you saw, two ARM devices, two Kubernetes, or better said, a Kubernetes cluster. So it doesn't make sense to have Portainer installed on each of the machines because you're basically you want to have a collaboration between them. So all you have to do is have one Portainer instance and just the agents spread around the entities, right? So John is actually accessing his home machine using all the functionality of the Portainer software, but just with the Portainer agent. So again, not only the agent is good because it enables to you very quickly connect an endpoint to a centralized Portainer instance. It's also very small and very light, so it has a small footprint. So it doesn't compromise the performance of your machine because in this case, John and Diana, they're two developers, so they really need to have um, all the resources that they can get from their machines for their work, basically, right? So let's leave all this computation and heavy stuff to this Docker instance that can be it can be a Docker machine. It can be actually. Let me show you another architecture, which would be, for instance, a good example of a full-fledged architecture with um, Portainer running on a Docker swarm or a Kubernetes cluster. So imagine you have a situation where you have a dev stack, right? And on this cluster or Docker swarm, you have a private image repository, a Git server, it can be like Bitbucket or GitLab, Jenkins, Jupyter Notebooks or VS Code Server, a storage NFS or S3 Minio server or whatever storage, so on and so forth. So in a centralized environment, you can have your dev stack running, and all you need is edge agents connecting to the centralized instance that users can work. Okay, so that's the concept behind this, right? Okay, so now we've added. Let me just make sure there are any. Oh, I see the question. Can I have a local Portainer installation and a remote agent in the same box? Yes, you can. Yes, actually, you can do that. I could install a local Portainer instance running locally on the machine and a remote agent for remote connectivity. Um, it does make sense also if you think it's something that you need, like you need to have Portainer to manage um, uh, images, containerized applications on your machine, and also on a remote instance. It's absolutely possible. It's actually something that you can do. Okay, so righty. Okay, sorry, we are here with Diana and her. So let's go to those virtual machines and see in practice what does that mean. This is Linux Mint, so this is Diana. So now Diana has access to her environment, her containerized environment on a centralized Portainer instance. I bet you guys cannot figure out what's this password that I've just created for Diana. Right. I'm going to say this. So you'll see how it does, right? It takes some time to start working, but if I click on it, it should connect to the endpoint, and she's actually connecting to her instance of the Portainer image of her own machine, running on a centralized Portainer server that could be again a Docker swarm or a Kubernetes cluster. So this is Diana's, let's say, workplace, right? This is her her machine. Actually, it's her machine that is being managed by a centralized Portainer instance. So here she can, for instance, let's say Diana needs to install as you can see, all she's running in her machine is a Portainer Edge agent. Let's say she needs to install a Ubuntu server. Sorry, a MySQL server. So I'm going to use the Ubuntu image, MySQL. If you don't know, Ubuntu has an LTS long-term support for several images that they curate. So if you go into Docker Hub and check Ubuntu images or Ubuntu containers, you'll see that they have like Grafana, Prometheus, Redis, MySQL, like the most common, or I think they have Postgre also. They have several images that they curate, and they have long-term support over those images, like 5 or 10 years. So I like them because I know they're very stable and very secure. The port is for this for Ubuntu is 3306. 3306. I also have to add an environment variable. That is MySQL root password. I'll just add a password. Preferably you would add a secret. I'm doing this here in the form. You can also do it, but there are other methods of doing this. I might show that in another how-to series, episode of how to add configuration files. Or here you can also add an environment file, so you don't necessarily have to type this into the form. Okay, so let's deploy this MySQL database. I think that was good. Container. Right, so it's probably pulling the image onto Diana's laptop. In the meantime, let's go to John Wick's machine. Let's see if John's access is already working. Oh, there you go. So John, also just like Diana, you can see his machine. It's being managed by the centralized Portainer instance. And John, what he needs to is to have access to Diana's MySQL database. How can you do that? You can use PHP myadmin. Right. Image this port host. That could be 80 because I'm not using 80. Let's put 8080. Okay, 8080, and the container is 80. And I'll deploy the container. Okay, PHP myadmin is very easy to deploy. Let's go back to now. As an administrator in the Portainer of this is the main Portainer instance I'm showing now. As an administrator, I can go into John's machine and see what's going on, as much as I can do the same in Diana's machine. Here I see that her MySQL database is up and running. Let's see if I can check the logs. Yep, everything's nice, up and running. Let's go to John again. Let's see if this PHP myadmin. Okay, PHP myadmin is running. Nice. But now I have an issue. John does not know the IP address of Diana's machine. And he needs her assistance to be able to just do a quick configuration of his PHP myadmin container. So he talks to the administrator, in this case, Joe here. And he says, Joe, can you please allow Diana to access my machine and fix my configuration? And Joe goes, sure. So I'll go here into manage access and grant access to Diana to John's machine. It can be as a standard user, as an endpoint administrator. The important thing here is to show that now this is where the collaboration comes in. Not only you can collaborate via a centralized Portainer instance, this instance allows intra-collaboration between users and other endpoints in the environment. So, and that could be, again, a Docker Swarm, a Kubernetes cluster, or even a Docker standalone machine. So I'm going to allow Diana to access John's machine via the Portainer agent. Now let's go back. Let's go to Diana's machine. It's actually this one, right? So if I go here to home, Now Diana sees John's machine also. But let me do a log out just to make sure that all the properties of these endpoints are loaded into Diana's instance. So I'm going to go into John's machine using the Portainer agent. I'm going to help him um, finish the PHP myadmin configuration. So I see that there's an environment variable missing. So John can access Diana's MySQL database using this interface. I'm going to edit the deployment here, add the following variable. PMA host is a variable that you can use on PHP myadmin to point to the server, MySQL server, you want to access. Diana's IP address is ends with 58. Okay. So I can redeploy this image. Okay, it'll just replace the binary. And with this, okay. Diana also can run a test. Yep, she can access. Now she's accessing the PHP myadmin container running on John's machine. Okay, that should also point back to her MySQL database. Let's see, password is db1234. Okay, success. So let's recap here. What just happened? And let's go back to the architecture. Okay, so I'll concentrate on these three figures: the Portainer Docker instance, John's machine, and Rihanna's machine. What happened? Okay. So via this instance here, this is the centralized instance that we can see on the original tab. John here is running PHP myadmin. Okay, but the database is actually running. The engine, the MySQL engine, is running on Diana's machine. Right. So sorry, it didn't quite place very well. Okay, now we can see it slightly better. And there you go. Okay, right. There was a situation here where I want the pencil. Where's the pencil? Oh, where's the pencil? Anyway, there was a situation here where they're working on a project together, and via Portainer, Diana managed to collaborate into John's machine to enable an additional configuration into his environment, so they could work together on this development. In this case, I used PHP myadmin and MySQL. It could have been anything else, a piece of code. It could be like, I don't know, any other circumstance where you require collaboration. The interesting thing is that all this was done via Portainer, right? This was enabled very quickly, very easily, using the Portainer edge agent connectivity. And also, I must oh, let me clear this up. How do you clean this? And I also would like to mention that this was also enabled by the RBAC functionality of Portainer Business, right? Because not only I assigned users to endpoints, which I could do using the traditional community edition, but more importantly, I assigned roles to these users. In this case, I gave Diana full access to John's environment. But let's say all she needed was a help desk access. with the help desk access, she does not, she cannot, I mean, the help desk access is the same as the endpoint administrator, but with read-only access, meaning she cannot really change any variables, but she can see absolutely everything that's running in John's machine or any other endpoint she would have access to via Portainer. So the role of the user is enabled via our back engine, right? So we saw the concept of the edge agent. It's usually used when you're talking about entities or servers or machines or clusters, Kubernetes or Docker swarms that are in a very remote location that you need access to, but you don't necessarily have a constant communication via the network that you're using to connect to these, let's say, endpoints. Um, so, in one word, mobile. I think that's better. And the other concept that we saw here was, let's go back to our edge agent concepts, cross collaboration, how these two users manage to communicate with each other and collaborate with each other, right, using the Portainer instance. And finally, accessing remote Portainer instances, how this is enabled via Portainer. And again, a nice architecture, and I hope you can see this well, that is an example of how we could do this is this. It might be too small to see, right? Let me do this on the other screen. Back to this desktop. Yes, this is an example. So we have again a stack, and this is in this case an example development stack. Obviously, it could be whatever you need that is being managed by Portainer on whatever orchestrator they use to work on your development. It could be Kubernetes, it could be Docker Swarm or Docker standalone. It really doesn't matter. The interesting thing here is that Portainer can work on top of these orchestrators to manage your containers, to manage your endpoints, to manage access to these endpoints. And there's also one other thing that I would like to show, access to registries. So you see, I have this private registry here that I need to also provide access to both Diana and John. Because this is where Diana and John are storing their the containers that they're working on. We're working on a private registry here, and John can now browse this private registry and access whatever containers that are being deployed into this private registry, right? And even do management of these images within Portainer. One thing I did not, this is still Diana, right? So let's go to John, make sure that John successfully managed to connect. Because what we really needed to do is connect to Diana's machine. So I know I'm running this again just to make sure I'm being truthful here. And yes, as we can see, it's a successful connection of John's container running on, being managed by centralized Portainer instance, running on his machine on Diana's laptop, running the MySQL engine, right? Okay, guys, so this is what I wanted to show you in terms of a demonstration. And I would like to open now the floor for questions and answers. I'm sure that Michael has already started with some of these questions and answers, but gentlemen, please feel free to ask whatever you want. And if you would like to also make any comments and participate, you can just raise your hand and we'll include you here as a participant of this webinar. Although I see there's a lot of Good morning, indeed. Any day that starts with Portainer is a bit. Oh, Garth, thank you so much. This is so cool to hear these. Yes, ask question. Whatever. Friends around. Okay, right. If you don't have any questions now, let's see. I would like to then get your feedback. How did you learn anything new? Is this something interesting for you? I mean, you can see that Portainer has several capabilities. Thank you, Garth. How does the system handle dynamic public IPs? Right, very good question, Marco. In this case, what I suggest is that instead of a a dynamic IP, you use DDNS, right? DDNS is dynamic domain name system, um, and there are several ways of deploying this, right? And a lot of possibilities. They're actually public or even free companies that allow you to, and services online that allows you to have a dynamic DNS on your machine. So instead of, in this case, and let me share my screen again. Instead of here adding in this endpoint, adding the IP address, I would add the DDNS host, so you wouldn't have connectivity issues, right? Whenever your DDNS is updated, Portainer would have access to this host without without, let's say, connectivity issues. I hope I answered your question. This is how I would do it, right? Actually, this is how I've already done it in the past. Okay. Network prerequisites. Well, in terms of the Portainer agent, um, no, not really. I mean, all you have to make sure is that you have connectivity to the Portainer instance, right? Somehow, again, be that directly. I mean, could you use a Portainer agent on a local network? Yes. I mean, it doesn't really make sense if you're running on a local network and your machine is, is static in the sense that it's not going to go anywhere, like a server or a desktop. So if you're on the same network, you could use a traditional Portainer agent. If you're on, let's say, a mobile situation, then the Portainer edge agent makes more sense. And for that, you have to make sure that this connectivity is enabled, be that by publishing the Portainer IP address, public IP address, which I wouldn't recommend. What I would recommend is to have a VPN to this Portainer instance. So your machine is protected behind a VPN. So you connect your entity, your edge agent, via this VPN to the Portainer instance, right? That's how I would do it. Actually, that's another very interesting thing. Depending on the VPN, you can have a fixed IP for that VPN, and then you don't have problems with dynamic public IPs, right? That's also a way to make sure you have a fixed IP running on that Portainer edge agent. All right. Yes, there will be a recording for this webinar available on our YouTube channel, so you can review it accordingly. Oh, Michael, I saw that you just answered. Yeah, Michael, you suggested, yeah, OpenVPN. OpenVPN is very good. I prefer WireGuard. I think it's easier to set up and it's more stable, and it's also integrated with the Linux kernel. I use Linux for personal and professional. And by personal and professional life, I use Linux. So what I like about WireGuard is that the technology is already integrated into the kernel. So it's much faster, in my opinion, than OpenVPN. It's more stable and it's very easy to set up. But again, OpenVPN is also a very good VPN technology. You can also use that if you prefer OpenVPN. Yeah, exactly, Garth. So if you have OpenVPN, WireGuard, it's easy to set up a fixed IP, and that reduces the issues of having public dynamic IPs running on your edge agents. Tunnels. You mean oh, Cloudflare tunnels? Okay. Um, I thought you were talking about SSH tunnels. SSH tunnels. Can we use SSH tunnels? We could use SSH tunnels, but I think it's slightly more complex than just using a regular VPN. Rodrigo Dominguez. Yes, Rodrigo, please. I'll tell you what. I'll send you my email address here so we can talk about a POC. You can have a trial license. You can, I think you can download a trial license from our website and use it to be able to do a full business edition of Portainer PLC in your environment. If you need an additional demo, please send me an email and I'd be happy to give you a more in-depth demo of Portainer with all the possibilities or whatever you need for your environment. Right? This is Michael's information, so if you want to connect directly to Michael, he's one of our gurus in Portainer. He knows, like, as you can see, answers all of our questions amazingly. So again, thank you, Michael, for your support and help here. This is his contact information. This is my contact information if you want to connect via LinkedIn or via email. Guys, feel free to connect to any of us and any of the channels that we have available for you guys. If you go into our website, you'll see there's a community um, button, and there you'll see all the ways that you can connect to us and talk to us directly. We'd be happy to answer all your questions and help you throughout your Portainer journey. Last event, after the event, both Michael and I and started working on the idea of doing a webinar just for the Raspberry Pi. I'm sure that a lot of you will find this very interesting. So Michael and I are working on this. I don't know yet how when we're gonna do it, but we will also have a webinar on Portainer running on a Raspberry Pi, and I hope you enjoy it because I'm a fan of these. Oh, I promised the link, right? Yes. So let me bring up my I'll just get the link directly from Amazon, Garth, and post it here in the chat so you can check out this little. This is a very nice small modem. You see, it's tiny and it connects. It's got these pogo pins that you connect to the Raspberry Pi directly. The zero, no, it's in this case these pogo pins are only compatible with the Raspberry Pi Zero, but you can use it on anything, not necessarily just a Raspberry Pi. Here it is. Okay. Let me share my screen so you guys can see. Share screen. Okay, so this is the little modem. I'll put the link here in our chat box for anyone that's interested. So I live in Costa Rica, okay, and why did I not only because I love playing around with these things, but this is also very important for me because what happens here in Costa Rica sometimes is that when we're in the rainy season, we have a lot of thunderstorms. Actually, it rains pretty much every day, and when there's thunderstorms, sometimes we have power outages, and with the power outage, sometimes our internet also just gets blown away. So I made this little modem, portable modem, that's running on a 4G SIM card, which is good enough. So I can have a backup to connect to the internet when there's a power outage and my cable provider just disappears into thin air, right? This is why I made this little device here, which I love so much. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy it because it's, as you see, 87. Ooh, I didn't pay that much. The price was still, when the stock starts going down, the price goes up considerably. It wasn't that expensive when I bought it. Let's see. Did I put the link here properly, or did I just send this to the link? Let me put the link again.
You got it there. It's working.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Let me check this one. Garth is suggesting. Nice.
Huh.
Interesting. It goes to my cart. Well,
hold on a minute. Let me.
See if you can
I tried to go directly to it, and it gave me a bad page. So hang on a second here.
Interesting.
Oh, it's because Zoom's doing it. Zoom's blocking it, I think.
Oh, I see. Well, can you did you find it, Michael?
Yeah, hang on.
So
hang on, I will.
Cool. So I also used another tiny little modem. I don't know where it is. I lost it somewhere. Also to run the Portainer Edge agent to collect temperature information at home in the garden. But and I ran it on a
thank you, Garth.
Thanks, Garth. 2G modem. It worked very well because I didn't need a full blown 5G, 4G connection. All I needed was to connect, every 5 seconds and get this like tiny piece of text string into a database. So it worked really well, and it worked also very well with the Portainer agent. So that's a good example and how you could use this to connect to Portainer and use the Edge agent nicely. Okay. Well, we're 1 hour into our webinar. So I'd like to close this by saying thank you very much to each and every one of you. And I usually have loads of fun. Also,
you did an awesome job, by the way, Adolfo. Thank you so
you.
much for your time.
Yeah, and thank you also, Michael, for your support and helping us all here with your amazing knowledge and answering all these tough questions that everyone brings into our webinars. Please stay tuned for our next episode. It's going to be very, very interesting. We're going to talk about migrating from Docker to Kubernetes using Portainer. That's going to be not only very challenging, but also amazing. And I hope to see you on our next webinar.